I do want to acknowledge the beautiful country that I'm coming to you from here in Wollongong, the interconnected countries of the Five Islands Dreaming people. And so I acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge the organisers of this event, Liam and Paul, and the whole group there, for such a fantastic opportunity. Because really, to me, this is what being in academia is all about: having a go and sharing and learning from each other. So that's the spirit in which I present this. And please bear in mind that this task was literally returned to students on Friday last week. So it's very fresh. And so my presentation is very much along the lines of what, why, how, so what, and what next. So let's kick off. In terms of just giving you a very quick what we did, here in Wollongong, we teach ethics and professional responsibility, pre-SLE 11. We teach it in the first year. It's 300 students enrolled, and our mid-session assignment has generally been a critical analysis essay. Now, it often talks about, analysing ethics in the profession or admission processes or things like that, and traditionally it's been done very poorly. It's something that I'm particularly interested in, legal education, but also thinking about how we can have a more real world approach to some of our tasks in a subject called professional responsibility. And again, this is nothing new to anybody else. Why we're also thinking about experimenting is the fact that the research is out there, and this is a fantastic resource if people haven't had a chance to read it, by some of my colleagues here in Wollongong in the engineering department, who have now for quite a long period of time been testing AI against assessments. And so one of the things they say is really the essay is something we have to rethink, and we really have to try and think about how we do it better. In addition to that, other recent research that has come out talks about the fact that really the AI is developing and is producing things that would be the equivalent of about a first-year associate. So with those things in mind, in the back of my head, I guess I started thinking about how I could do something differently with this task. And I am going to share the task with you. What we did was come up with trying to simulate a real-world task. We have a compulsory internship here at the University of Wollongong. So we sort of suggested you're interning, and the boss has asked you to do them a first draft of a speech that they have to give. And so the kind of things that I would often put in a critical analysis essay, both sides of the argument. And as I say, I share this with the spirit of, please understand that this was our first go and having a go of it. I'm not trying to say that this is a perfect assignment, and certainly I've made some learnings, which I'll come to in a minute. I did try and think about what ways to design the question to make it robust yet useful for students. So this is kind of the basis of the question, the sort of scenario background. But in addition to that, with my understanding and working with some fabulous colleagues like Professor Anne Rogerson, who are really well ahead of me in the academic integrity and AI space, talking to them and thinking about utilising the reflection process, that the idea that the students, rather than sort of have to acknowledge where in the actual paper they are using CoPilot, that they incorporate a reflection. So as others have mentioned, CoPilot is something that UOW has given us a commercial data protection environment. So we have, as long as they've got the green tick, anything that they're using and sharing within that environment is not being made more broadly available. So that's what we suggested. Now, obviously, no control on whether they use ChatGPT or one of the other things, but it was about trying to put some parameters around it for them. And from a sense of, even though a lot of the conversation at the university level is that all students are using AI, my personal and our experience within perhaps law students is that might not be as prevalent as in some other disciplines. So colleagues in engineering and computer science would suggest that everybody's using Gen AI for everything. My students, whether they're telling us what we want to hear or not, are saying that they're not that confident in it. And in fact, when we come to some of the learnings, they were quite nervous about using it. And so in terms of the other thing I did was I produced a video of not only showing them how to access CoPilot within the protected environment, but also, as you can see in that dodgy little picture, me showing them all the dozen or so essays that I'd already produced on it. So trying to be very overt and open with them about this is a new task, but also I have had lots and lots and lots of goes, and this is what you get. You can get lots of different things. So bear in mind that that is what, you know, have a think about the fact that if you put in your first draft, it's probably something I've already got here. So what did I find? I guess, as I say, this is very preliminary findings. I would have to say, as a lot of research suggests already, it probably does lift up a bit of that bottom end of the cohort. So AI could probably help you get a passing grade. And from an academic perspective, I guess I felt though, I read a lot less ridiculously irrelevant papers. So we went from the past year or two, our failure rate, or probably not last year, over the years or two where we've done a more traditional critical analysis essay, the failure rate has been anywhere up around the 10, 11%. The failure rate here was around about 6%. So I think it helped them with that brainstorming. But importantly, students recognised that it wasn't particularly good with scholarly sources. And so case law was a challenge. We hear a lot about hallucinated cases. We actually only identified one hallucinated case across all the student papers. Now, I trust my markers, and I think that that was pretty good. Hopefully the students were thinking about that. These sort of hallucinated case did jump out very obviously with no citation and a very unusual title. The good students, I'd have to say, their reflection suggested that once they did that initial brainstorming, they kind of abandoned the use of CoPilot, and they actually felt that it really wasn't useful, and they went back to their traditional library searches, Westlaw, LexisNexis, etc. And interestingly, my colleague Armin, who's actually presenting in the concurrent panel, has written on this recently and reporting on some research that suggests, in fact, potentially AI can pull the top students down if they're not careful. So that if they're not exercising that own independent judgment, that maybe they are pulling their marks down. I didn't necessarily find that in ours. The main thing students reported on in their reflection that they found it particularly helpful was grammar and structuring. Now, you know, in terms of my tips then for what I would suggest if you're thinking about it, one, I mean, I'm always have a go, have a chat to people, and by all means reach out if you want to talk more with me about my experience. But I think number one, give very clear guidance, and students seem to like the video and liked the fact that I showed them how to do it. I didn't have a single question on how to access it, any of those issues. Now, whether that's because they know, but I think, again, lots of guidance. So I gave extra tips on the fact that this is not about teaching you to use AI. It's about you having a go. It's about you getting some experience, but putting it within the context of ethics and plagiarism and the issues that they might want to think about. In terms of the question, I really think a key thing that I've come away with was the layering of the question, which was kind of a lucky thing, talking it through with colleagues at the last minute. Adding to the question, AI will never replace an ethical lawyer, really was not as many. So AI will never replace a lawyer. It produced lots of things, but it didn't get into the ethics, and it didn't get into the legislation and the cases and things like that. So that can be really useful. You do need to think about redoing your rubric, and the fact that this will then likely change the weighting of criteria. So instead of identifying issues being very important, that's not, and you really are moving into that critical analysis. The reflection was useful, very general, as I mentioned, for many, but as I mentioned, a lot of the students, particularly correlating with the top marks, suggested that they were hesitant to use it. They were concerned that they believed that it was going to be inaccurate, and they were going to, they considered it unethical. So these are very first cut learnings or very first cut suggestions. I think, interestingly, either, as I said, whether they thought it's what I wanted to hear, the topic of the question, whether AI can ever replace an ethical lawyer, their conclusion was just generally, no, of course not, it won't. And in fact, perhaps demonstrated a lack of understanding of how good AI is, which is sort of the conversations we often have in class. But I think that does go to the question of the importance of incorporating this into their legal education. In terms of what next, all I'm going to say is that I am planning to then dig into this. So I've given you very preliminary thoughts. They don't even amount to findings. We are going to get ethics approval for, as Genevieve said, student greater feedback, staff greater feedback, and analyse the reflections. So hopefully a publication